The Oort Perimeter, Chapter 17. Toby rolled the dagger over in his hand as he studied it carefully. "Where did you lads say you found this?" he asked. "I got it off one of the guys who tried to mug us back at the station. They were all carrying them, as well as some bigger hardware too." "I'm curious why they didn't just shoot at you," said the chief engineer. "Oh, believe me, they did. Just not right away. They first tried to surprise us and make the kill swift and silent. When that didn't work, they started shooting," said Vlad. Toby shrugged. "A pistol blast would have been just as effective, and quicker too." "Not really. When they started firing, alert klaxons went off. So they likely started out with swords and daggers to avoid setting off the alarms." Toby nodded, but said nothing as he continued to study the dagger. Lars watched Toby's face for a while and then noticed something. "You've seen this kind of blade before, haven't you?" he asked. I have, but only in history class." Lars was surprised at this. "History class? What do you mean?" he asked. "This dagger very closely resembles the Roman Pugio from around the late 1st century BC. While there are obvious differences, the design is very similar." Lars looked briefly at Vlad, who furrowed his brow in interest. "It's funny you should say that, as we came to the same conclusion. In fact, while we were searching the records for clues, we came across records identifying it as possibly belonging to either the Romans or the Celtiberians," said Lars. "Well, either is possible, as the Celtiberians were conquered by the Romans in the mid-3rd century BC. It was from their weapons that the gladius and the pugio were ultimately derived. So any similarities between the two are not surprising." Lars pointed at the dagger and said, "So what are a bunch of humans with Roman-style daggers doing this far out in space?" "I think that should be our next question." "Indeed it should. However, I don't have any answers, nor do I have any idea where to proceed to next," said Toby. Lars contemplated this for several moments, and then thought of something. "Would there be any chance that some Romans might have somehow gained space travel and flown to the stars?" he asked. Toby shook his head and handed Lars the dagger. "Unlikely. The Romans were conquerors, not scientists. If anyone might have had a chance of achieving spaceflight, it would have been either the Greeks or the Egyptians. But all theories giving weight to those possibilities were quashed ages ago." "What if they were abducted?" asked Vlad. Toby shrugged. It's possible. But I would think they'd have adapted many of the traits and customs of their captors, rather than clinging to something this ancient and arcane." Lars shook his head. "Not really. As I told the others, even if they were completely immersed in an alien culture, they'd still retain some semblance of who they were. We see even that in our own culture. So I don't see why some of their past couldn't still exist in their present society." Just then the ship's intercom chirped to life. "Sir, I've got a Indian library ship on long-range sensors," said the operations officer over the intercom. Toby perked up. "A Indian library ship? That might be of some use to us." "How so?" asked Lars. "The Indians are one of the 9 ancient races, just like the Varnok and the Gaelic Von. But what sets them apart is that they're known for their obsessive desire to collect information and data from every source and location across the stars and learn from it, ultimately storing all of it in a massive database bigger than you could ever imagine. The best part is, anyone who is in need of information can go to them and get answers to pretty much anything they want to know, no matter how obscure. After all, they aren't called the librarians of the galaxy for nothing," said Toby. "That's great. But what's the significance of a library ship?" "Information, lad. Each library ship contains what is known as a shard, a fragment of the master database that is filled with a wide variety of information." Lars thought about this for a moment. "So, if they've got one of these shards aboard that ship, is it possible to snag a copy of it from them?" he asked. Toby nodded. It is. If we match their current course and speed, we should be able to tap into their main computer and do a complete dump of the shard they're carrying. That should provide us with enough information to hopefully find the answers to all of our questions, or at the very least figure out where to go from here. It'll only be a tiny fraction of the entire Yandian knowledge archive, but even that will provide us with a massive amount of data. Yeah, that's great. But will they allow us to do it? Asked Lars. Toby shrugged. They freely share all of their data, save for the most sensitive, with all who ask of them. So I see no reason why they wouldn't do that now. Lars pondered this briefly for several moments before nodding. All right, then let's get to it. Sarah walked slowly through the long hallways of the Central Command Station, known officially as Command 1, and studied the walls and floors around her. For such an advanced facility, there was much about it that seemed overly utilitarian and Spartan. Some who lived on this vast orbital space station had decorated their individual quarters, adding ornaments, wall dressings and more to try and take away some of its hard, military edge. But beyond that it was almost as cold and unwelcoming as a crypt. As she walked past two crewmen working on a power access panel nearby, she heard something cry out for help which caught her attention. She turned and was surprised to see a small blob of energy that appeared to be caught in a panel in a rather painful position. The little blob soon spotted her and, knowing that she could see it, even though the two men couldn't, began pleading with her for assistance and freeing itself. Sarah cocked an eyebrow at this strange predicament, and then turned her attention to the two men working on the panel. "Gentlemen, I'm curious of what you're doing," she said. The two men turned and looked at her. "We're repairing this control panel." "It's been acting up all day," said one of the men. "What's wrong with it?" "We're not sure. But it's been messing with some equipment farther down the way. So we're trying to determine what's wrong with it." She furrowed her brow, and said, "Really? Interesting. But did you know that you have another panel 2 halls down that appears ready to overload?" The two men blinked in surprise. "A panel overloading? We'd better check that out right away," said one of the men. They quickly gathered up their tools and hurried down the hallway. Sarah quietly watched them leave, and then, when they were out of sight, walked over and carefully helped the small energy blob free itself of the panel. She then lifted it up to her face and smiled. The blob cooed and nuzzled her happily. "How'd you get stuck in those nasty power lines, little one?" she asked kindly. The little blob squeaked happily and rubbed her hands in appreciation. She giggled, and then gently tossed it into the air. "Now go back to where you belong, little one. This is no place for you to play." The little blob vanished through the ceiling and quickly made its way outside. As it did, Zoan appeared next to her a moment later. "You know those things are disgusting," he said disdainfully. Sarah turned, put her finger in his chest, and said, "They're not disgusting. They're cute and cuddly. You, on the other hand, are the one who's disgusting." Zoan smiled deviously. "You always had a soft spot for disgusting little creatures like that, be they living or dead energy, didn't you? You're even love of these humans, which is even more disgusting. How can you stand to be around something so revolting?" Sarah frowned at him and pressed her finger deeper into his chest. "What is your problem? You always pester me about my choices, who I should be with, where I should go, what I should do, and so on, as though you have nothing better to do with your worthless excuse for an existence," she said angrily. Zoan frowned. "You're wasting your time here doing, what I do with my time is my business, not yours. Now why don't you take that worthless waste of energy you call a life force and go do something useful, like feeding a black hole with it," she snapped. Zoan fumed angrily, his eyes glowing like fire as his body seemed to burst into flame. Moments later he vanished. "Yeah, I knew that'd shut him up," she said with a grin. After a moment she turned and continued strolling down the hallway, skipping playfully as she sung a happy tune to herself. Phylan strolled back and forth in front of his desk as he pondered the information that had been given to him. After a moment he stopped and looked at Julius. "You certain that's what you heard?" he asked. Julius nodded. "Clear as day, sir. I was down near the market when 2 Sevedith came strolling by me. I'm so scared of Sevedith that I hid behind one of the merchant tables. They then stopped right next to me and began talking about a Varnock invasion fleet. Ugh, exclaimed Phyland as he began to pace again. An invasion fleet. It just doesn't make sense. Why would the Varnock be foolish enough to move forces so openly when they know everyone's on edge? Julius scrunched up his face in a nervous expression, and said, "They're not moving them openly. At least I don't think they are." Phyland stopped cold and stared at him. "Wait, what do you mean?" "Well, there's no discussion of it on the galactic net, and none of the other ambassadors are talking about it." Phyland blinked in surprise. Then why would 2/7 know about this, but not anyone else? Julius shrugged. "They're security officers who work in the lower receiving area. They hear all of the random banter from the traders that come in." Phyland rubbed his head in frustration. "Oh Julius, Julius. What am I going to do with you? Random rumors from self-interested, likely drunken traders, is not grounds for concern." "What isn't?" came a chirpy, but friendly voice. Phyland paused, and then turned in surprise to see Finch entering the room. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "I came to offer a wing of wisdom to you." "What?" No, I'm fine." "It's nothing," said Phyland dismissively. "You have learned of movements by the Varnock fleet, have you not?" asked Finch. "Nah, it's just a big misunderstanding. My associate here overheard 2/7 talking about rumors of a fleet of Varnock ships that are reportedly preparing to attack Earth, and thought I needed to know." Finch cocked his head in confused curiosity. "Then why are you not telling Adjutant President Sin about this?" he asked. "I'm not going to bother him with a bunch of drunken nonsense passed on by a couple of walking rugs," grunted Phyland. Finch ruffled his feathers and cocked his head in disbelief at Phyland's surprising dismissal of the news Julius had brought. 7th do not lie. It is their blood oath. They believe that if they lie, they will suffer a death most dishonorable, and torture in their underworld most severe. Thus a 7th can be trusted to always tell the truth. If it is not the truth, or if there is question of its validity, they will not say it, nor share it. Therefore, if these 7th say that a Varnock fleet is moving to destroy Earth, I would believe them." Phyland looked at Finch curiously. "Are you dead certain that 7th never lie? They fear too great an evil to risk such a dishonor. Therefore, no word will ever pass their lips which is not the full and uncontested truth." Phyland looked at Julius, and then back at Finch. "Well then, if that's the case, I think we better get cracking and tell Sin." Finch nodded. "I already have. My ears received the same wind of knowledge as that of your assistant. He is right now acting upon it on your behalf." Phyland grinned. "Finch, my old friend, I like you more every day." Finch cocked his head in curiosity, but said nothing.